COVID-19 has made its impact on Wyoming communities and schools. And over the course of our time together today, we're going to be hearing from teens and young people here at the University of Wyoming and Sheridan High School who have agreed to share their experiences as students during the pandemic here last year and this year. The impacts are numerous. We're going to cover as much as we can. And the goal of the conversation certainly are to give our guests the opportunity to reflect on what they've learned, what's not worked, what did work, and what life has been like as a student during COVID-19. So first off, I want to introduce our guests at Sheridan High School. And if you folks would raise your hands, Cameron Record, he is joining us. He is an 11th grader, a junior. We have Izzy Kenna, who's in the middle there. And then we have Grant Baxter, who also is a senior. And thanks to the three of you for joining us. And then here from the University of Wyoming, we have Artemis Langford and Will Ward. One of the interesting things about all of these students is they're debaters. So hopefully that will bring some spice to our conversation today. And if they get after each other, that's kind of what they're used to doing. So we're looking forward to that. So I want to start things off and maybe start with our friends at the high school. Grant, if you want to start us off here with this, and I'm going to have all of you answer this question. What's school been like during a pandemic?
Well, I can definitely say it started pretty hectic. I mean, spring break went from 1 week to 2 to an entire summer, and it just kept on going. But overall, I think school has been, during a pandemic, a time to learn not only about ourselves, but how we're able to stick together as a community. I mean, it's truly been a life-changing experience. And even though that sometimes it can be crazy, I think it's been pretty great.
Izzy?
I think that school has definitely been interesting. There have been a lot of things that have changed, such as online learning, particularly last year, and how they had to adapt the curriculum to be able to manage the online format. And I do think that the change in the amount of interaction you had with people was a very big difference than when we were in person.
Cameron?
Well, online school was definitely kind of, as my colleagues have said, it's definitely a switch. It's unlike anything. I really think that someone who hasn't done it can really put in, you can't really understand it until you've actually done it. However, one of the best things I think is that throughout the entire process, even throughout when we were online in March of 2020, and then back in school with masks for the 2020-21 school year, it was so great to see that everyone was trying to maintain as much of a sense of normalcy as possible. And I think that helped so many students adapt and stay successful through it all.
Artemis, what was life like at the University of Wyoming? If you could take us back to that time, and what's it been like during this pandemic?
Thank you, Bob. I had to confess I wasn't actually here during the pandemic at the University of Wyoming. I'm a transfer student from Western Washington University up in Bellingham. But I think, I don't know if Will can speak to this more accurately, but for my experience up in Washington, it was all online. Everything was online. You weren't even allowed in certain areas on campus up there. We had to do COVID testing almost every week because they were very concerned about those that needed to live in the apartments or the dorms up there. It was particularly hard because there were so many technology problems because they never had to transfer their entire infrastructure onto an online landscape instead of in person. And that was hard on me because I was not used to online education. And it was hard enough being halfway through senior year of high school to be online, except there were no Zoom meetings. There's nothing like this where we could talk in person. Instead, it was homework was sent by mail because the school district had no idea what to do until after I left.
So it's been better here since you've been at the University of Wyoming, where you get to be in person.
Way better. I appreciate the traditional format, even if there are changes like having to wear masks in class. I feel that's way more tolerable than constant issues with Zoom or anything else online. But I think Will can speak to the experience a lot better than I can.
Go ahead, Will.
Well, I sort of can and I sort of can't. I'm a freshman here at UW, and I got to see both high school and college on how it's like in a pandemic. And I've actually noticed that the high school is a little bit more strict when it comes to COVID measures or anything else. This might just be UW, but not much has really changed, or at least I don't really see a significant impact. I only have one online class, and that's because it's a class about technology. So yeah, it's not really a whole major change. There's no different seating arrangements, no different positioning in class for the most part. Life is back to normal, it seems almost. I think the one thing that isn't is having to take COVID tests on a random basis. You get randomly selected to take a COVID test. I think that's the one thing that isn't back to normal outside of masks. So yeah, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it is a bit of a challenge, especially with online classes, because you do have Zoom problems. And I am technologically illiterate, so it is very hard to take a tech class online.
So I want to ask Will and Artemis first as we work back a little bit. So have you felt unsafe? As you know, we've had a couple of cases where the numbers have blown up in Albany County because you have friends of yours that are having traditional parties and get-togethers like we always have, football games and that kind of thing. Have you felt unsafe at any point during any of this?
I'll start us off. I haven't felt safe or unsafe at all. Although a lot of people are out partying, I'm not really into that crowd. However, even with other people where you're in close proximity with people that might have COVID, I haven't quite felt unsafe. The majority of people at UW are vaccinated, and cases remain relatively low for the most part. It does blow up every now and then, and so, but I do feel quite safe. I don't think that there is anything to be super scared of. But yeah, life at UW is feels pretty normal, actually.
Artemis?
With Will, I'm not part of the party crowd by any means. I'm much more of a reserved person. But friends on my floor, live on a dorm, some of them go to parties. Not a lot, where my floor in particularly is very conscious about making sure that, we're safe, because as a community, we want to ensure that all of us, are protected. We do our due diligence. Some attend the football games, which have lots of people there. And, if they get sick, they get tested. In fact, two of my friends on the floor had to go into isolation because one of them tested positive for COVID. Just making sure that if you stay sick, you stay in your room, you get tested, you take basic precautions, and, you just don't act stupid. Is the general rule. With events, it's just, if you're in a crowded area, wear your mask, wash your hands on a regular basis, use hand sanitizer, and, we can live fairly, I wouldn't say normally, like back before 2020, but somewhere, close to that.
Let me ask our high school students a little bit of a different question about this, but what do you think are the types of protocols that were put in place since the beginning that you feel maybe have worked the best in keeping you and your students, fellow students safe? Izzy, you want to take that one first?
I think instigating a mask mandate was very important in helping keeping students safe, because I know that at least at Sheridan High School, that if at least recently, if you're wearing a mask and you come into close proximity with someone who has COVID or tested positive, you don't necessarily need to be quarantined. And I do believe that the masks have helped, because although it doesn't protect you, it protects others. And so if you are sick, you have less of a chance of getting the students around you sick.
Brandon, any thoughts on that?
I would totally agree. I mean, I would arguably say that the quarantining when sick, I think, is the most important aspect, along with the mask. I mean, it's the fact that when you're sick, you should stay at home and not get other people sick, because that's how it spreads. And I think it's also, like, as he said, it's important that we're wearing masks when necessary and when we're in proximity with other people, because if somebody is sick and they don't know it, they could spread it. And so wearing the mask at school especially have allowed us to stay in school, which I think is the most important aspect of this all.
Cameron, have people been following the rules?
I would say generally, yes. I don't see many people when we had the mask mandate. I didn't really see very many people not wearing their mask. And I think that really kind of comes from the mentality, and everyone understands the reason why we're able to be in school was because we were all wearing our masks. And I mean, it's such an important thing to be keeping each other safe. And so many people, I mean, we all experienced online school. And I don't think I've met a single person that said, we should just do that all the time. So many people were so excited to be back in person. And the general mindset was very much, whatever we have to do to keep it this way, whether that be masks or anything along those lines, that's what we're going to do to make sure we can do that.
Now, Grant, I was led to believe by a couple of people I know in Sheridan that students hated wearing masks, and it was actually impacting their learning. Have you run into people who have said that to you, and does that seem right?
There's definitely a pretty big group here that I would say it's more of a parent group that's pretty against mask wearing. And people will say, yes, it does impact their learning. And I mean, I guess in some, I would understand if you're in PE running the mile and you're wearing a mask, that could be a bit difficult. But still, the overall arching idea, like I said earlier, was just we have to think about the common good. We have to think what's good for the community as a whole. And so, yeah, while there are probably some people that don't like wearing masks, and I mean, I even I wear glasses. So whenever I wear a mask, fogs up every single time. But you deal with it, because the whole point is for everyone to be safe together.
Artemis and I share your pain. Izzy, what are your thoughts on that? Is it a situation where you've got parents upset about it, and if you found maybe students it doesn't matter as much to, or are there plenty of students that are concerned about it?
I think that what comes first is the student's education. Like, that is the ultimate goal. And comparatively, school in person with masks has better results than our online versions of education, because I know that the curriculum was cut down to a bare minimum when we went into quarantine. But with the masks, we have the full curriculum. And even if it does affect some students' learning experience, the overall effect is greater than quarantine.
And I would almost go further than that. And you have to think about the economic disparities some people might face. Everyone has different at-home lives. And so parents, especially with younger kids that aren't able to take care of them and have a full-time job. I mean, we're not only talking about the children's education here, but we're talking about the parents and putting food on the table. And so wearing a simple cloth mask isn't going to be the end of the world, because you really have to think about what every single individual is going through.
And I think that that's really kind of the general mindset. Of course, in every situation, there's always going to be some people that disagree. But I think luckily in this case, the majority is definitely of the mindset that, the masks are important. And, again, it's all about what do we need to do to make sure we're staying in person.
So back to the university, Will, what about the protocols at the university? Did they make sense to you or not? I guess your thoughts on that.
So some of the requirements at UW, I think, strike a good balance between those who are more libertarian and those who want to see more masks. So those who don't and do want to wear masks, I think it's a good balance. Our enforcement of the current mask mandate here is pretty spotty, and typically only really applies in classrooms. Although all buildings are supposed to, you're supposed to wear a mask, I have not seen or even heard of any enforcement of any kind out in the halls or in common rooms. So outside of classrooms, there is no mask requirements effectively being enforced. And I think it's a good balance because a lot of people here feel very strongly against masks, and a lot of other people feel very strongly for them. So I think it's a good balance, and I think that at least makes sense as far as the college goes.
What about you, Artemis?
That's an excellent question. Thank you. I sit on a part of the ASU Dove government. So for the past few weeks, I've been sitting on full ASU Dove Senate meetings. And from time to time, there will be people who wish to register their displeasure about the mask mandate on campus. And they're like, I did a poll at the football game, one gentleman said in one meeting. And, 162 people said that they didn't like wearing the masks. And one person asked, how many people did you poll? And he's like, 162 people. And it's like, those numbers are kind of skewed, especially when the ASU Dove poll that was sent out for the wider student population had more than, I think, 1,600 students participate in that. And the overwhelming majority were in support of the current mask mandate. So like Will was saying, there is, there's both sides to it. And it's interesting to see, an issue be so politicized. And it reminds me of my own research. I'm a history major for secondary education. And looking back at the last big pandemic this country faced back in 1920, the Spanish flu epidemic, it's interesting to see the comparisons between the two, especially how political it became in the later development of both pandemics. But for the most part, I think the mask mandate policy is reasonable. Compared to other universities, it's way far relaxed compared to our sister universities in Colorado, or, we're a lot more stringent than Utah, which has no mask mandate policies. So I think we're in a good balance. And I think the trustees, they voted the same way in their last meeting where they extended the policy till December.
Artemis, you came here from a place, as you said, was a little stricter. I'm curious, would you like it to be a little more strict here?
Being living in Washington for that year, but also being from Wyoming, I both have the sense of rugged individualism as characteristic of the state, as well as in Washington where, there's individualism, but it's also, there's a collective identity of how the community should operate. I don't think it needs to get any stricter other than perhaps students should be encouraged to get tested more on a regular basis. I'm not saying it has to be a weekly or a bi-weekly basis, but they should get tested at least on a monthly basis, I think.
Any thoughts on that, Will?
I actually totally agree with that. I'm not much of a fan of the mask policy at all. I understand it's there for a good reason, but I do have some issues with it, especially its spotty enforcement and arbitrary enforcement in certain areas. But I think that the best policy moving forward that UW can do is reintroduce its recommended testing policy. Right now, a whole lot of students can't get tested at all because tests are very limited in the number. So if the university was able to provide some, maybe every month or so, I'm sure a lot of students would take advantage of it and certainly help general health. Since a lot of people are asymptomatic, it's hard to tell whether or not you have COVID. So it's significantly easier to control COVID if you know you have it.
Cameron, we won't tell any of your administrators what your answer is to this, so we'll go ahead and put you on the spot. They won't care, whatever you say. What's been dumb? What hasn't worked?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'm not even sure I've had a good answer for that. I really feel like, and Sheridan might be the exception, but as far as the district goes and the policies they've put forward, everything has been, very much thought through. Whenever a mask mandate is implemented, there's always, the deliberation and the debate, especially from the community, about do we really want to put our kids in masks? And so frequently they have to really, take a step back and make sure that any decision that they're making is actually one that's going to beneficially impact the students. And overall, I feel like they've done a very good job of that. If I had to pick something, it was disappointing that many of our events last year for some competitions like speech and debate had to be online and virtual. But again, there's always good reasons for it. And I felt like, overall, the school district has done a very good job of making sure that every policy has a meaning behind it.
Okay, Grant, you're the senior. You're ready to blast them. What I can tell it in your face. What hasn't worked?
So I do think there is a lot of things that have worked wonderfully here. I do, however, feel like there's sometimes disparities between certain groups that, like, for example, I don't want to be that person that calls out the athletes, but like the football players, for example, participate, no mask, whatever, they can do as they please. But like, for example, our FBLA trip, we are going to attend a fully vaccinated and you're required to wear masks to attend, canceled because we were worried that they could bring COVID back, which I don't really see how that makes much sense. And I feel like, a lot of times there's certain groups that are prioritized in our community. And while I understand, an overall consensus where, okay, well, we all have to wear masks, we all have to participate in this, I think it should be shared equally among the different groups. You shouldn't prioritize sports over academics or vice versa. That's my personal opinion.
I think that a lot of the decisions that have been made happened pretty quickly, maybe a little too quickly, because it was a day or two before school actually started when they decided to have the mask mandate. And I believe that a lot of people would have preferred if it happened like a week or two before so that people would know. And then they lifted the mask mandate just recently, and I didn't find out until the day before. And I believe that it would benefit a lot more people and a lot more families to be aware of what is happening before it actually happens.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you three about that. So, and I think it's throughout the county, both of the larger district, of course, where you are, and then the smaller one, both got rid of that mask mandate, and that's forthcoming. What do you think about that, Izzy? Is that a good idea?
I think that they should have waited a little longer to lift it. And as I said, give more of a warning, because just recently children have been able to get the vaccine if their parents wish. And I believe that the parents should have been given enough time to get their child vaccinated if they wished before they lifted the mask mandate.
I personally like the idea that, it's still strongly recommended. It gives people the option, the versatility. So, if you want to wear a mask, you're more than welcome to. And then if you would rather not, then you also are provided that option. I think that's something that's so important, is kind of meeting people in the middle, what works well for everyone together.
Cameron, any thoughts from you on that? I would say in the situation where we are now, again, with masks strongly recommended, it's really always, it kind of puts a little more of the responsibility on the individual students. If you're not feeling well, probably not a bad idea to put that mask on. If you're sick, stay home, let your teachers know. And I just feel like that's actually one of the benefits that we had by going through all this, the online schooling, is we really got the infrastructure set up so that if a student for some reason does feel, ill, or if they do actually come down with COVID, we have the ability to kind of meet them and provide them with at least some form of education. Yes, it's not quite as good as in person, but I feel like that's one of the main things to keep in mind.
And I also like the idea. Would you like to go ahead? Oh, I also like the idea that we're able to revisit if needed. So if we do have a surge of cases, well, then we can wear masks for a couple more weeks. It's, as long as we're revisiting it, and I think that's one of the biggest things, we keep it in check. If it goes out of control, we put the mask back on. If we're fine, then keep it as it is. I mean, I think it's definitely a way that we can ensure that, we're treating this as we should.
Let's come back here. Will, go ahead.
I actually noticed at the college level that unlike the high school level, many of these systems that were in place previously for students back a year ago when we had online learning, many of these systems in place in some classes kind of broke down. So in some classes, even if you feel sick, you still have to go to it because there is no way to have an option for online classes. And if you choose not to go, you're now missing out entirely on lectures and different types of assignments. So it's very hard here at the college level because it's class by class basis. And unfortunately, it's just not being kept very well. Some classes, of course, are amazing at it and often go too far in the other direction because now students are taking advantage of it and not showing up in class at all. So I think it's a little bit hard to be able to strike a perfect balance. But as far as the college is concerned, I think there needs to be a significant improvement and standardization of how the college is going to move forward with online teaching.
That's a great point. And I heard that come up during a trustees meeting, I think this fall. Do you think that the university, well, so many of you like to take online classes because it works with jobs and that sort of thing. Does there need to be, whether it's classes or requirements for training, to make sure that these teachers know how to do this correctly? As you said, some are great at it and some I understand are not.
Well, actually, as I said before, when I was talking about my online class that's teaching with technology, I'm a secondary education major, and I'm going to be learning about how to teach with technology. So I understand that there are a lot of, even now there's more training with teaching online, but I just don't think it is very well taught. Not the class specifically, but it's very hard to get an entire lesson plan to be available online. And watching many teachers and professors try to both address online students and in person and still have an equal amount of education between the two, it's very hard. I think that the way that the university can do best, however, is to still allow teachers to teach as they wish in the classroom, whether it be online or in person. However, I do think that they need to make sure that they have these online abilities still encouraged among teachers. And so you can still go on to online classes because that is very important, especially if you feel very sick. So I think it's the university that needs to take action here, unfortunately.
Artemis, any thoughts?
Sorry, Zoom error. Yeah, I think Will is right. In many ways, we do need to standardize the process because we think that this pandemic is bad. Well, what about the next one? Scientists, in fact, I was watching a documentary the other day that was made in 2019 talking about the next big pandemic. A little bit of an irony there. But it is true that we need to prepare because we thought COVID was going to be bad. Well, what about the next one? So I think there needs to be a standardization place, and right now is the perfect opportunity to do it. The others, teachers, I think just have pardon me. I think just had the same difficulty as students, like transferring, their entire classroom to an online setting. And then most of these teachers have never done with Zoom or any technology because they are of that certain generation and age where computers were new. And, this flexibility is difficult. but I think it needs to happen, especially as online classes become more part of the future. And I think the pandemic kind of really accelerated that process. So I think the university needs to take advantage of the moment to start implementing those kind of things for the future.
So what do you guys think about that in high school? Is that something they need to practice and do a little better job on? Anybody want to jump on that?
I think there always can be improvement. I mean, I think getting through this, it is important to be prepared for what comes next. And I mean, you never know, there could be a new strain, there could be something that happens, and we might need to go online again. And even though I really prefer to stay in person, we have to always be prepared for that reality. I think one of the biggest issues is that sometimes online classes can lack engagement in a sense. You're just watching the class go about in front of you, but you're not really there, you're not engaged. So it's how do you engage a student as you would the same in the classroom? And I think that's a pretty big challenge that both teachers and students face in this regards.
And I would like to add that as like a nation and as a world, we are growing more technologically. It's exponential growth. And I do believe that being able to adapt in the technological realm in cases such as COVID will allow us to do better in cases that don't involve an outside factor such as COVID. And back to the not being able to participate in the lessons, I have teachers that record their lessons for students who are gone, and that never happened before COVID. You would just have to go in and make up your lost work, but with the recorded lessons, you're able to see what you missed exactly.
And going off that, I mean, I feel like there's one of the best things that has come out of this is that the district has been prepared for, if another situation comes where we do all have to go home. One of the big switch, actually, it's more of a minor switch, but it is kind of big though at the same time. In the past, we've always been privileged enough to have Chromebooks for every student within the schools. And one of the things they started doing once we went into quarantine, and they were able to distribute Chromebooks to every single student, which allowed so many to stay connected. And one of the policies they kept going into the 2020-2021 school year, as well as this one, is actually having students take their devices home with them, with the idea being if the situation should ever arise that we should have another big moment. And if we do have to go online, we're ready and we're prepared. And I think that's so important. And it's something that doesn't really get talked about a lot. But yeah, that's definitely one of the best things that's come out of this is that preparation.
If Wyoming was to go through another pandemic, what advice would be helpful to people your age? Let's start with our high school friends on that one. Izzy, you want to take that?
I think it would be important to tell people to just stick with it and take care of yourself ultimately, because during the quarantine, it really gave you time to reflect on what you're doing and how you're taking care of yourself. And that's really important and necessary. And with in-person school, you can get caught up in the workload and maintaining your grades and extracurriculars and your social life. But when COVID hit and we went into quarantine, a lot of that was impacted. So it's very important to know that you need to take care of yourself first.
Going off of that, one of the most important things is making sure that you're staying in touch with all your friends. For so many people, passing periods in the high school, that's your social hour right there. You might see a friend that you don't have a class with and get to talk about something that happened in your day. And with online school, that was one of the things I noticed is you really lose that element. No longer do you get that just kind of in the hall brush past communication, which kind of just makes high school so much fuller. So I would totally say that, stay connected with your friends, give them a phone call, send them a text message, schedule time to go get ice cream sometime together, safely, of course. But that's definitely one of the most important piece of advice I would have to give.
I'd probably tell myself, looking back at it, I think take advantage of what you can that's online. I mean, the internet is an incredible place. There's, millions, if not billions of websites out there. And there's so many different things that you can do and partake in that you just might not otherwise realize. I remember starting out quarantine, I was super excited. Oh my gosh, a week of Netflix, this is crazy. And then, 3 weeks later, I'm sitting there eating a bag of chips. I'm like, oh my gosh, what has happened? And, I think starting from the beginning, I would have told myself, well, look, this is a time that you can better yourself. This is a time you can learn more about yourself, take on another language, participate in something that you otherwise maybe never would have. And so I think it's what you make out of it is what's really important. That's what I would have told myself.
How about you, Artemis?
You know, it's a really good question once again. I think part of, future pandemics, future situations that will require students to be confined to indoors. And for me, most of COVID, I was inside. I'd say 70 to 80% of the time I was indoors, and I lived in an area and terrain where, getting exercise was a bit difficult because of the steep slope. Up in Bellingham, I lived on a hill that was I believe 300 feet above sea level, an area where sea level was, dominant. So getting around was really difficult, especially during the winter where it's just constantly raining. So biking wasn't an option either. Getting exercise was very important, I think, for the future. Getting in a routine where you get physical activity, because that missing element of walking around school, I didn't realize how much that had an impact on my life of staying healthy. And the other is, like Cameron was saying, communicating with friends, putting that, social network that you have from in person to an online format would be extraordinarily beneficial. And I wish that I had developed that better, but living in a new environment, it was really difficult because it's not the same thing as your friend is we're talking online 3 houses away or across town. The nearest family I had was in Idaho, and that was more than 800 miles away. So I think forming social connections, doing online events is really important for the future.
Well,
I actually have to really agree with Cameron. College, especially more, and definitely here in UW. College is very isolationist. You have relative isolation here. There's tons of people around that you can talk to, but I've watched too many people use COVID as an excuse to shut themselves indoors and play video games or watch movies all day. And while that's a fun weekend, it doesn't do anything for your social life, and it's not fun at all in the long run. And so I have used COVID as an excuse too much. And I think other people would agree with me that we can't use COVID as an excuse anymore. We need to go out and go hiking, even if it's alone. Go out and do something rather than just sitting at home doing homework and playing video games. Much as to my professors would disagree with doing the homework, but I would much rather see people go out and do very, very well out hiking or with other people than having to sit at home alone all day.
Okay, now this is something that I think is real. There's a possibility we may have another year of this, that kind of thing. So what would you like to say to public health officials and school administrators to help students, yourselves, and the education community get through the next year as safely and as easily and as efficiently as possible? Will, you want to kick us off there?
Yeah, so I've watched newsreels come in from other countries about how crazy they're going and how over the board they are with COVID measures and restrictions. I think what the university is doing right now is about as much as it should be going. I do think things like temperature checks and testing for COVID, it would be some good policies to bring back. Obviously not rigorously, like every day to COVID checks. But I do think that right now is a good balance. Wyoming has a very good history of being isolationist, not liking what the government tells them to do. So I think right now is, at least for the university, a very good balance for what they should be doing as far as health concerns, and also for making sure that people's personal freedoms and interests are also taken care of. So, and as far as education is concerned, if we do have it substantially bad, I think that college administrators need to make sure, again, that standardization process takes place to where it's easier to access things online.
What do you think, Artemis?
Yeah, if we have to do another year of this, or let's say, in 2 years, my last year of school here at college, there's another pandemic, with Ebola virus or, some disease that, sneaks up behind you. The first thing is, lots of students, I think the majority of college students are financially insecure in some ways. They rely on grants, scholarships, government funding, private loans, regular government subsidy loans to working. And if they're out of job, because most college students are in the service industry for the most part, they'll be impacted. And I think the government and the university need to offer immediate relief to that. With this, it was way too slow. Like, I was at risk of homelessness constantly throughout the entire pandemic because the university raised the rates on housing, because they thought, to make up for the lost income of students not being there in person. And that's just the wrong direction to go. Will the university take a hit in funding? Absolutely. We've seen this with the University of Wyoming take a hit of a drop in enrollment numbers during the pandemic and even now. So relief is very important. The second thing is, there's fear of getting the disease or fear of the government, like Will was saying, wanting to take your freedoms and all that. I think, they need to crack down harder on misinformation because we've seen that with, Yahoo's, wanting to take ivermectin and people dying because they're taking horse dewormer. I think the government, while they're, concerns about constitutionality, even these businesses where Facebook, Twitter, all these social media platforms, they're responsible, and they have the power and, they can use the authority of their terms of service to say, we're not going to allow that on our platform. You can take it onto MySpace or something, but not on our platform. The other is, the media at this entire time, from CNN to Fox News, they're only talking about one thing: COVID, 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 COVID. More so with CNN, MSNBC, and other major news networks and newspaper publications like the New York Times. They keep talking about COVID, and that drains people. If they're reading about the same thing, they become desensitized to what's actually happening. They look at how many COVID deaths there are, and they just look at that like any other big tragedy where there's lots of casualties. They become desensitized to the reality of how many people died and the impact of that. Because all the media is saying is, basically what I'm trying to say is the media needs to pick its battles. It needs to, talk about other important issues. And while COVID is very important right now and still relevant, it can't drain people. They need to stop fear mongering, like, is this what's going to happen next? Or like the Delta variant and all that. While important information, they're talking about it irresponsibly. They're twisting the messages of public health officials like in the CDC or Dr. Fauci. And that does a lot more harm than good, because it gives those that want to do misinformation a huge opportunity to get a following. And I think that's just bad entirely.
So Grant, what do you think?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure.
I'm sorry.
As we head into another year, we probably are going to have this last little while. What would you say to public health officials and your school administrators to help your students continue education safely and move forward safely for another year?
Well, as mentioned earlier, I think it's paramount that we continue improving. There are always ways that we can learn more about how does this affect students? How does this affect families? And I think that's something that's so important. I don't believe personally that there is ever a time when there is enough. And you should always be able to be looking to see what else can I be doing different? How else can I be helping, make this change more accommodating of all students? I think that's something that's just so important. And even if, for example, if the public health administration in Wyoming or the government were to allot some money to high schools or school districts in general to prepare teachers, prepare the schools, and have money for training for these kinds of things to see, well, is this helping our students or is this harming them? And I mean, also another year in the future, I think it's just really important to think what is best for the students and the community as a whole. And as mentioned, even at the very beginning of this, if it's wearing a mask or reevaluating the situation, that's what we should do, because, in school learning, for me at least, is very important.
And additionally with that, it's so important that, especially school administrators are always putting the needs of the students and the teachers first, above what could be their own political views. It's so critical, and especially in a situation like this, where we're talking about people's health, and in some cases, for some people who are immunocompromised, it's life and death. And it's so important that is at the forefront of minds as you are reevaluating and determining the best course of action above all else.
And I would like to add that I believe that school administrators should listen to the health officials first, because the mask mandate for the 2021-2022 school year in Sheridan was enacted because someone from the hospital said they didn't have beds. And my mom works for a hospital in Idaho, and for months there were little to no beds available for people who didn't have COVID and if they needed help. And same goes for surrounding states.
Izzy, how are you doing and your friends with the pandemic?
Doing good. I am managing through it. My family has been a big lifeline, and my friends have been a big lifeline, and I've reconnected with people that I lost contact with. And I do think that although the pandemic wasn't the greatest thing to happen, that it did have some benefits, because it did help with my personal mental health.
A question for Grant. Did this screw up your high school career? Gosh, this happened as a junior, and you're heading into graduation.
Yeah, I would honestly. I mean, it wasn't ideal. Spring break of my sophomore year, got out a week early, like I said, and I was really excited. It just kind of kept going. And yeah, there were a lot of things that I've, debate tournaments abroad, or, whether it be Model UN having, their conference in New York, or just there's so many things that I felt like were somewhat, left out of. But again, at the end of the day, you have to look at the bright side of the situation. And I would say, I made some of my best friends through the pandemic. I learned so much more about myself through the pandemic. And, it gave me the opportunity to work on things I might never, ever have worked on otherwise.
Cameron, what's the last year and a half been like for you?
Well, it definitely started off crazy, going into spring break and not knowing what was going to happen in the future. Are we going back at the end of the year? Are we not? Are we staying online? It was definitely a time of, going into the unknown, and that's not something I normally kind of experienced. And that unknown even persisted, going into sophomore year. I'd never taken the end of the year finals before, because freshman year, that was all online and completely different. But I think one of the biggest things that I've learned through this is that, if you bond together with people, and people that work together can get through just about anything. If we can make it through a global pandemic, and kind of be on what seems to be kind of the exit path, so you could say, I mean, it's a pretty big accomplishment to say we made it through or are making it through currently.
Artemis, what about you? I mean, you said you stayed in quite a bit. I'm just curious, what about your friends, yourself? I mean, you came to a new place. How's your mental health? How are you doing with all of this?
Well, I think I'm doing much better. And, uh, in high school, I had a therapist to help me with some other issues, but when COVID came about, it became very important, to talk about how I'm doing, because I wasn't able to see a lot of my family or friends. And then after high school, going up to Washington, where I thought it would be a mix of in-person to online, until the day I arrived, they officially announced it was all online, which was a little bit of an inconvenience. So I had to meet friends, through online groups. I had to be very proactive with my new parish up there, trying to advocate for myself became very important. The other was, being busy really helped. In some ways, it was kind of a detriment with academics because I took too much courses because I thought, I need to be busy. But sometimes you have to give a little space to be alone with your thoughts for a while. Because if you're alone for too long, then I had a really bad day and I got very in a really dark place. So, trying to find that balance became very essential. Took a while, but I think I finally got it coming back here now. As for, my siblings got COVID, and thank goodness, it was mild symptoms, but that was really scary because, my little sister in particular, my little brother, they're both very receptive to upper respiratory diseases like in pneumonia. So it was scary, seeing what COVID would do. And, the worst of it was that, lots of them partially lost their sense of taste and smell. And a few distant relatives passed away because of COVID. So, the family, all enrolling for family, just trying to navigate, staying safe while other family members very much didn't like wearing masks or vaccinations. And, they posted on social media about their outrage about, especially after Biden became president, it got worse. But, every one of the family, I think for the most part agrees, there has to be a delicate balance to stay together. But as long as we stay together, we'll get through it.
Well, I thought my freshman year of college was actually extremely difficult, thinking back on it. And then you had your senior year of high school probably messed with, something you've been looking forward to your entire life. So those are some challenges right away. How are you doing?
Well, that's perfectly said. I mean, I'm doing great right now. But
one of my reporters, go ahead.
I'm doing great right now, but unfortunately, I did lose out a lot my senior year. We didn't get to travel at all for speech and debate. Despite being pretty decent at debate, I never actually got to leave the state of Wyoming all 4 years of high school. Something I was looking forward to, not because I wanted to leave Wyoming, I just enjoy travel. I never got to travel outside of the state, which was unfortunate. I know many people who are even younger than me have already done that multiple times for debate. And freshman year of high school or college here, I'm still getting messed with too. I'm not able to travel at all for speech or for debate at all. A lot of our tournaments are either online or we're not allowed to go to some in-person tournaments, which is not great. It's all unfortunate, really. And as far as me personally, I don't think mentally I had any challenges. I did physically, though. Being trapped in my house with my younger brother all day posed a threat. We didn't get along. So, I mean, it all worked out in the end. I didn't get to meet as many people. I'm one of those people who knows everyone in town, everyone in school. Even right now, it's very hard to talk to people when they're very closed. They don't want to talk to you. Sometimes it's out of fear of COVID. Other times, it's silence. And I think things like masks and other policies play into that. Not a direct cause, but just play into it. And it just makes communication a lot harder. So, but yeah, the worst thing in the end, for me at least, was not being able to go to as many events and all that.
Well, it was a great conversation. I want to thank from Sheridan High School, Grant Baxter, Izzy Kenna, and Cameron Record, who joined us, and then Artemis Langford here at the University of Wyoming, as well as Will Ward. Do you want to mention, we've got some past discussions as well as a number of stories available on our website at wyomingpublicmedia.org. It's our neighbor to neighbor resource page if you want to check that out for some past information as well as some things happening in the future. I want to thank all of you for joining us and thank you for watching.